Scott McNamara is a district attorney in Oneida County and is in studio. And good morning.
Good morning, Bill. How are you today?
Good. So, Attorney Policelli, not just here but everywhere, has really been vehemently stating that that his client is innocent, and I think the quote was, "You are sentencing an innocent person here."
Yeah, I was in court when he said that, and part of me is thinking, why would he plead her out? I don't believe she's innocent. I know the evidence. I'm not quite sure why Frank's saying what he's saying. Maybe it's a little blustering or something. I really don't know. I mean, the evidence is pretty clear what she pled guilty to. We do have evidence that she did know that the boys were being held against their will. As a matter of fact, her daughter in a text message said, "What should I do?" And she says, "Make them stay." That makes her an accessory to them being held against her will. We also have videotape of her when they took Luke to the hospital when he was dead. Christopher was in another van, and her son, one of her sons, was walking towards the emergency room, and she gets up and she directs him to leave. Well, Chris is still being held against his will. So once again, she's giving direction on what these boys should do. The text messages also show that she told the boys to give her real-time updates. Okay, well, if you don't know what's going on, why would you want updates?
Yeah.
And also, she told them to record it, and actually was sending down the little SIM cards that you put in devices. So, I don't, I mean, Frank's Frank, and
that's evidence that came through interviews, through
Joe's
physical,
Joe's cell phone.
through the cell phone.
So it's not like we have to,
Right.
That's pretty good evidence.
It's not circumstantial.
There are text messages that are happening through the night. So, and we also know that he called her, and we know what he said when he was interviewed. So I disagree with him. Could have we proven beyond a reasonable doubt, that she was an accomplice to the assault? No, and that's why we took the plea to unlawful imprisonment, because that's what we thought we could prove with her, and that's why her sentence is so much lower. And but the part that I got to tell you, I've been doing this for over 24 years. I have never in those 24 years seen any lawyer victim bash to the extent that I saw him and then what he's continued to do.
We're talking about the molestation stuff.
Yeah, and just the way he's treated the people. Crystal Leonard, who's the oldest child of this family, gave a very heartfelt speech in court. She didn't really attack anybody. She wasn't saying people's names, and she was talking about, and she actually showed a very nice video of the family at a birthday party. And you know what? When you watch the video, they look like a normal family. It looks like something you or I would be doing with our family. And then in court, he said that, I think his word, I can't remember his exact words, but basically that Bruce Leonard's crazy or he's nuts or something. I've met Bruce Leonard numerous times. I've probably spent, at this point, someplace around 5 hours with him, so I really can't say I know him, but I can say the one thing when you get to meet him is he's not an evil man. He's not. He did a bad thing, and if you understand what happened was, over years, the Irwin family convinced Bruce Leonard in particular that they had a very close relationship with God. And if you wanted to get to heaven, you had to go through them. Now, would I believe that? No. But what? People believe stuff. I mean, I'm not the most religious person in the world. I know my mother-in-law is very, very religious. And if the priest said, told her to do 10 jumping jacks, she would do 10 jumping jacks.
Well, and it's interesting because Frank Policelli did compare it to the Catholic Church, and I guess my take on that would be, if indeed what he's saying is true, we certainly know the priest molestation stuff is just horrific, but even if that is true, it does not make, the old two wrongs don't make a right. It doesn't justify things.
And you know what? I'll address the molestation. I came on before and I talked about it, and I'll talk about what I know and what evidence we have. And first of all, we have no evidence. No one's ever said there's no proof of it. There's never been any allegation that Bruce Leonard ever molested anybody. Okay, so Bruce Leonard never did anything to anybody. And Frank phrases it like there's a lot of molestation going on inside of that church.
I don't think that allegation was made here.
Okay, but I want to clarify that. There's no...
So that's the father, by the way, Bruce Leonard.
There's no allegation of that. What the allegation was... Okay, and what the boys were beat for was they were being accused of molesting Sarah Ferguson's children.
Right.
Okay, and the children that can talk were interviewed and deny it. Okay, they said they were never touched bad by Uncle Luke or Uncle Chris. They deny that. We also, 3 of the children consented to a physical examination. 1 didn't. The 3 that consented, there was no signs. And when you're talking about children that age, if sexual organs are penetrated inside of them, it tears them, it rips them. They have scars.
Right.
I've seen that, unfortunately. And unfortunately, I have seen cases where molestation is terrible. I know both sides of it. There's no evidence in this case. 0 physical evidence, 0 evidence of the children. Now, there was, the sister claims that the boys had touched her inappropriate when they were younger. And by her testimony at the trial, that stopped over 2 years before this incident took place. It did not take place in the church. It took place at their personal home, and it had stopped. Now, what happened was, that information was never known to Bruce Leonard until that night. And so I think that is what inflamed him. It's like, you guys were doing what? But you know what? I think... instead of me getting in here and becoming me trying to fight with Frank Policelli, which, to be honest with you, I'm never going to win a fight with Frank Policelli because he yells and screams, gets mad, and so I'm not even going to try. But what I do think is this is a good time to try to move on from this, and especially move the community on. And here's something we have to remember. Number 1, first of all, you should never, absolutely ever, use some sort of weapon on your children to punish them. Period. Okay?
Right.
Don't hit your children with weapons, especially in parts of their body that can ultimately bleed or cause them to bleed to death. And something that people need to know is black and blue marks, bruises, are bleeding. That's internal. You're bleeding.
Right.
When you whip somebody in the genitals are an area that are highly vascular. So when they become cut, they bleed profusely. So you should never hit people, okay? And when you're talking about children, okay, there's a whole litany of information on the internet, and there's professionals and everything, but you don't even have to go to the professionals. You can just go on the internet and find credible sites that tell you how to deal with this. Whether we like it or not, all children go through stages in life that would deal with sexuality, okay? From when they're first born to, when they're like 4 or 5, or, that 4 to 6 age. It's not uncommon for children to touch themselves and to explore their sexuality. And then when you get into the age of 7 to 12, it's very common, okay? As a matter of fact, the sociology and the psychology of people, it's very common for people to go through sexually, they do things to explore sexuality, not to the level that adults do, but they mimic adults. They play house, they play doctor, they mimic what they see, and that's the problem, and that's why it's so important that parents don't let their children see certain things, but the good things like holding hands, affectionate kissing, children will then mock that.
Right.
Okay, so that's very common, and the way to deal with that as a parent, okay, is to talk to them in age-appropriate talk and explain to them their sexuality and what's right and wrong, okay? And in this case, that was never done. And what's very discouraging is, in this whole fact pattern, the oldest person was Policelli's client. She was the person that ultimately, in my opinion, should have said, hey, wait a second, everyone needs to take a time out here. We need to talk about this. If in fact, these things took place, how do we address this, okay? And I can tell you right now, had the police been called, had we investigated it, no one would have been charged because there's no evidence of it. So I think it's really reckless for someone to run around and say something happened with those children of Sarah Ferguson when we don't have any proof of that.
Can I ask you, Chris Leonard on the stand made some type of admission. There was never a follow-up on the stand. But did you, going into that, have you had conversations with him about what he, quote-unquote, admitted to doing?
I did not press him on it. The first time we ever heard anything from Christopher Leonard was when I was preparing him for trial. I would say, though, that from talking to him, they have had molestation redefined for them. Okay, so for example, I'll tell you a perfect example. When Crystal was showing her videotape of the family, Chris did something that had that videotape been shown to the pastor, I'm sure she would have accused him of molestation. And what he did was his sister's hair was hanging down so nobody could see what she was when she was opening because she had long hair, and he did this to her. He took her hair and he pushed it out of the way. Okay, that would be viewed as a sexual act by the people in that church, no matter what you did. So, for example, if you're wrestling, and in the course of wrestling you were to accidentally touch the area of a breast or the groin area in a wrestling, that would be considered sexual molestation. Looking at somebody. Now, the problem was that Chris was required or forced to or made to change diapers. Most children don't do that on their own unless it's forced. Right. So, what I believe from my interpretation was that he was looking at the body parts, and that would be considered molestation in his. He never, I asked him point blank, did you ever put, any of your body parts, and he said no.
Didn't Sarah Ferguson, though, claim that he had, wasn't she more graphic on the stand?
Sarah Ferguson never saw anything. Sarah Ferguson said that he was full of, that there was spirits and she could feel them, and they locked the doors. Sarah Ferguson knew about what had taken place between the children when they were younger, and I think she feared that it was going to happen. I mean, she locked her apartment was a fortress, and there was no way to get into that, according to the testimony, her own testimony. And honestly, what the sister said was, and she told us, had the boys told the truth about how they got into the apartment, the beating would have stopped. The problem was they didn't get into the apartment. They couldn't tell. So they kept lying. They kept saying, we broke in. They go, you couldn't have broken in because the lock wasn't broken. We picked the lock. How would you pick the lock?
And as we're running out of time, I want to clarify one thing that I talked about yesterday. And so why wasn't the molestation, the questions, why didn't that pursue? And my answer to that yesterday was, I'd like it from you, is that really that there's, even if there was a molestation, it didn't change the fact that these kids were beaten to death, and that doesn't justify such an act.
Exactly. And here's the other part. It's irrelevant in the courtroom because there is no self-defense. There's no justification. So, for example, if somebody molests one of my children right now, that is not a reason for me to go beat that person. I can't claim a justification defense. Or so it's irrelevant. The judge wouldn't let us get into it.
Can I ask you this,
and made it very clear to us, don't get into that.
Yeah.
If you had evidence that Lucas and Christopher molested the kids, would you have pursued charges against Christopher?
Even after everything he went through?
Yeah.
You would have, yes.
And here's the thing. The only evidence we have is stuff when Christopher was underage. I mean, this, by the sister's own admission, Christopher was less than 16 when all this was happening. So there was nothing there for us to investigate from the DA's perspective. We don't prosecute people unless they're 16 or over, unless they murder somebody.
That's very interesting.
But we did. But we did, when this first started, we did investigate the allegations of the children. All of those children were taken to the Child Advocacy Center. All of them were interviewed. All those interviews are videotaped. We took the children and we had gynecological examinations done on the females, and we had examinations done on the little boys. All of this was investigated the day after Lucas died, to look into this, because all these things were. I mean, the father said at the hospital, he got his butt whooped because he's a child molester. So we did investigate it. We didn't find anything. So I can tell you right now, as the DA, it'd be highly inappropriate for me to run around and start speculating or making false allegations. And that's why, when it first happened, I was trying very hard to tap it down, because I couldn't tell you at that point because we had a whole trial to go through. But there's no evidence at all that the boys, and then take it forward. The children have never come forward now and said, hey, I lied to you the first time.
Right.
The little girl that we couldn't interview, that we couldn't examine then because she said no. I'm sure she's had a well visit because she's in the custody of the government now. She's in foster care. I'm sure she's went to doctors and had well visits. We've never got a report that, oh my God, this girl has terrible injuries or she has scars. There's none of that. So there's no allegation. At that night, things got whipped up. They were accusing them, and the boys were admitting. And as Chris said on the stand, I would admit it to anything to get him to stop whipping me in the groin with a cord.
I don't know that any of us can understand what it would be like to be going through what those kids went through.
I can't imagine.
I can't even think about it.
And you know what's sad? It hasn't stopped. And that's what really disappoints me about what Frank's doing right now. You know what? He has a job to do. I have a job to do. But the reality is we're talking about a family, and we're talking about young children that have a life to live out. And you know what? I try not to let my job or let my personal feelings about stuff get into the way of people moving on. And I just don't see where it serves any purpose to run around and trash talk a family. This family has and I still believe the family, in a way, is a victim of a lot of things. And the reality is they lost a child. Their other child has been taken away and put in foster care. One parent's going to serve a long period of jail, probably the rest of his life.
Yeah.
The other one's going to serve. This family's been ripped apart. What good does running around and just flaming the fire of speculation? Here's the problem, too. Both of these young children are out there in the public. They're out there right now. They both go to schools locally. And you know as well as I do, okay? There's a certain percentage of the population, and I would guess it's over 10%, that when they hear something, they believe it, regardless if it's true or not. And we know that from the recent thing with the pizza place.
Yeah.
The bottom line is these children have to live out there. And when you do things like that, I personally feel you run the risk of having people hurt themselves because they can't live under that incredible pressure that gets put on you when you're being called a child molester or you molested somebody. And I just I would think more of Frank if he would dial it back. He can say whatever he wants about his client, but I don't see where the victim bashing has to where it serves any purpose. I mean, he made his money. He got his client what I consider a fair deal. I think it was what she deserved. I mean, that's what we could prove. You know, we had this conversation one other time. Javon Womling. You know what?
Yep.
What Scott McNamara, personally thinks happened to baby LaVon and what I could prove were totally separate things. But I have a job to do, and that is to be able to prove in a court of law what we can prove. And in this case, I could prove that she was, in my opinion, guilty of unlawful imprisonment, that we had the evidence to prove that. We had the documents, we had the testimony, and that's what we did, you know. But you know, and I worry about the children. They got to go on. They're young people. I mean, they're less than 20 years old still, and I just don't see any good that comes out of it. Yeah. So,
District Attorney Scott McNamara, as always. I always feel bad because you're always defending what's already been said. But the Christmas Eve show won't be like that. So.
That's true.
Thank you for taking the time this morning.